This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back. With the new Secretary of State to be elected in just a couple of weeks, the outgoing election leader in the state talks about how threats and misinformation led him to not run again. Capitol reporter Shannon Hecht brings us the details.
Secretary of State Kyle Ardoin announced earlier this year that he would not be seeking re-election. He has held the office since 2018 and led the state through the trials of voting in a pandemic and the onslaught of lies about election fraud in the state. A word of advice to the person who will replace him, Ardoin says not to let the fringe voices sway decisions of the office.
And make the decisions that are best for the state and not for any one contingency that is pushing back or pushing for something else.
Following controversy over selecting new voting machines to replace the current aging system, the legislature created the Voting System Commission. Meetings turned into a platform for people like Mike Lindell to cast doubt over elections that Ardoin had worked hard to secure.
I think the Voting System Commission, although a good idea in concept, created the very situation that brought about intimidation, harassment.
Ardoin talked about harassment of his staff lowering morale, and there has been a drastic drop in interest in being poll workers. He says the attacks toward him began to take a toll on his health.
There were door hangers placed on my door and in my entire neighborhood saying inaccurate things about me and my record, almost trying to incite my neighbors.
The state is still yet to decide on a new voting system, and with another presidential race on the horizon, Ardoin knew that he had to pass on the baton. Two candidates face off to replace him on November 18th. For your local election headquarters, I'm Shannon Hecht.
In the fallout after the primary election where Democrats failed to get their candidate of choice into the runoff for governor, some are calling on the chair of the party to resign. Treasurer candidate Dustin Granger, who was the highest vote-earning Democrat in the state in that primary, says Cade Brumley needs to go. In a statement, Granger says, quote, "From allowing countless seats to go uncontested, handing wins to far-right extremists, attempting her own self-serving bid for governor, and eroding trust with both local and national stakeholders, it's time Cade Brumley resign and make way for a new day in Louisiana," end quote. Meanwhile, in the countdown to the polls, the Louisiana Democratic Party is endorsing Secretary of State candidate Gwen Collins Greenup. This is the second time that Greenup has made a bid for that position, losing out to incumbent Kyle Ardoin back in 2018. The party originally endorsed her opponent and fellow Democrat Arthur Morrell in the primary election. On the Republican side of things, Governor-elect Jeff Landry is endorsing the conservatives that are in the running for statewide offices in the runoff. With the election expected to have incredibly low voter turnout, he's asking people to vote for John Fleming for treasurer, Liz Morrell for attorney general, and Nancy Landry for Secretary of State. Election day is November 18th. Early last week, super fog led to a major crash that left dozens of people injured and claimed the lives of 8 people. Interstate 55 was closed for most of the week. Kenny Lopez brings us a look at the wreck right after it happened.
Man, it's rough for any parent that, go through something like that. I'm just glad he's all right.
Vernon Banks' son, Alexander Robinson, is one of dozens of drivers involved in the massive pileup on I-55.
He got a gash in his leg. I think a state troop or somebody kind of patched that up, and he think his shoulder's dislocated, but other than that, he's fine.
Luckily, he's okay, but many others are injured, and priority number one is getting them help.
To evaluate the situation, make sure that we're getting the assistance to those that need it. This is a huge amount of resources of first responders that are needed.
I-55 had to be closed in both directions.
I-55 is expected to be an extended closure as we deal with this situation and remove these vehicles from the bridge.
In the pileup, a tanker caught fire and a car went over into Lake Maurepas.
I believe that the tank itself did not actually catch fire. It was just the cab. So there was one vehicle that went over the railing and into the water. Thankfully, that driver was able to get out of that vehicle.
State troopers are still trying to determine exactly how many crashes happened, but after providing medical assistance, that's when they have the enormous task of clearing all the cars.
It's going to require a lot of tow trucks. So we're having to call companies from all around the area to be able to get the tow trucks here.
As for Vernon, hours have gone by, and he's still waiting to see his son.
It's nothing to do but just hug him and tell him how much you love him.
Wow, that video is unbelievable. And major news for the Calcasieu River Bridge in Lake Charles. Plans for the new I-10 bridge have come to a screeching halt after legislators refused to enter a public-private partnership in order to fund it. The $2.1 billion plan was given a fatal blow after legislators couldn't get behind a toll. Trucking companies felt their toll would be much too high. Now, unless the legislature changes its mind on a toll or comes up with a lot more money for the project, it could be delayed. Coming up, U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy, a Republican, teams up with a Democrat to end college hazing. They're hoping to make a difference with transparency. Stay with us. We'll be right back.